Greetings, fellow primates. Jim the Ape here. And I wanted to talk about another thing that I saw on my Pet Humans Facebook. Today, it appears that internet personality, and I say that loosely, Roosh V and a group that he, I guess, founded or that he belongs to, something called Return of Kings, apparently wants to have meetings, I guess multiple meetings in different locations, different geographical locations around the world. It seems they want to meet in places like Ottawa, Canada, New Zealand, and Sydney, Australia. And I'm just going to get this right out of the way. I don't like Roosh V, personally. It's hard to like the guy because he's kind of offensive on purpose, and he says a lot of kind of fucked up things. And, of course, I prefer to call him Douche B, which I'm sure I am not the first person to do that because it's really easy to make that connection with his name, and because he says a lot of douchebaggy type things. But at the same time, I respect his right to have his opinions, and I respect his right to express those opinions, and I respect the right of anyone who agrees with those opinions to, meet with and, talk to him and have meetings of like-minded people. Now, obviously, the United States Constitution does not apply to all of these international locations that they're trying to have meetings at, but I think that the principles behind the U.S. Constitution should be applied globally, and especially to first world countries. The right to freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and especially the right of the people to peaceably assemble. To have groups that can get together and have meetings and talk about whatever they want to talk about, as long as it's peaceably, which was written in the Constitution. And that basically just means as long as they're not rioting, as long as they're not hurting anybody or doing anything harmful, as long as they're just meeting and talking, that they have that right. But a lot of people on the internet, based on the reaction to this news, a lot of people on the internet don't seem to respect that. They are saying all kinds of things about Roosh V, some of which may very well be true. They're saying he advocates rape. They're saying he hates women. All the kind of criticisms that you might expect from feminists and social justice warriors. And, in some cases, they, when they make these kinds of accusations, they may be complete bullshit. Maybe sometimes they're blowing something out of proportion, and it's not as bad as they're making it sound. And you know what? Maybe in Roosh V's case, some of these accusations might be accurate, but here's the thing. Freedom of speech means that even the bigots get to talk. And that extends to people who are outwardly sexist. That extends to people who are outwardly racist. That extends to people who are outwardly homophobic. And the reason why that's a good thing, you may think, oh, well, obviously sexism and racism and homophobia, those are horrible things, right? But it's actually a good thing, because when racism and sexism and homophobia and all this other stuff is allowed to speak, and these ideas are allowed to be espoused, and especially when people are allowed to respond to these ideas, people who disagree with these ideas are allowed to respond in a public forum, what's going to happen over time is that bad ideas and ideas that are not useful will eventually die out. They'll get smaller and smaller, just like racism has. I mean, racism is always going to exist to some extent, but I believe that over time, racism has significantly declined and diminished. Like, I think there's a lot less openly, outwardly, explicitly racist people walking around today than there were, say, 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Well, I should say that white supremacy has been on the decline, or racism as defined by social justice warriors, which is, the whole prejudice plus power, and it's only racism if it's systematic. Meanwhile, the same social justice warriors have an extreme racial prejudice against white people. But, that's why they twist the definition, so that they can say that they can't be racist. Anyway, I think the idea is that in an open forum, in the open marketplace of ideas, people that are controversial, people who are offensive, people who maybe even are in some way bigoted, will be allowed to speak, but people who are not, and people who oppose those ideas, will be able to respond, and the best ideas will continue and carry on because people will hear them and they'll agree. And then bad ideas will be on the decline because less and less people are going to agree with it, until the most bigoted of people are a small minority. And I think that's, to an extent, I think that's already the case. But I think freedom is far more important than the sensibilities of the public. So even if there are groups that offend people and there are groups that say things that people don't like, it's way more important for those groups to have the freedom to say those things that make people uncomfortable. It's way more important for that than it is for people to not be offended. Like, people say all the time, I have the right not to be offended. Well, that's technically true. You have the right to choose to not take offense to anything, but you're not guaranteed the right to try to censor anything or anybody that offends you. You know what I'm saying? Like, in a way, you could say you have the right not to be offended because you have the right to choose not to be, but you don't have the right not to be offended in the sense that if something offends you, it needs to be censored by the government. I think I've made that clear. But anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about it. I support the rights of groups like this, even though I disagree with probably a lot of what they say. I support groups like this. I support the right, anyway. The right of these groups like the, whatever it is, Return of Kings. I support the rights of even horrible things like the Westboro Baptist Church, or even the Ku Klux Klan. I support the rights of all these horrible groups to assemble and talk about whatever it is they talk about, and I even support their right to spew their hatred amongst themselves, because, if you start censoring these people and if you start banning these people using government resources, then how long will it be before they start coming for people who might not actually be bigots, who might just have controversial opinions? How long will it be before, reasonable people start to be censored? So that's why I support the right and the freedom of these groups, no matter how horrible their ideas may be, to get together and spew their hatred if they want, and, talk, meet and talk amongst themselves and all that shit. I support freedom of expression and the right to peaceably assemble, as is spelled out in the First Amendment. So that about does it for me. What are your thoughts? What do you think of Douche B, or Roosh V, as you might call him? What do you think of this, Return of Kings group trying to meet in these international locations? And what do you think about this video? As always, like or dislike, comment, subscribe. That's it for me. I'll see you next time. Stay great, apes.